Behind the golden splendor and Hollywood glamour of the most expensive film ever made at the time lay a production so chaotic, it nearly destroyed a major studio. From Vatican death threats to gelato-selling extras caught on camera, from tracheotomy scars hidden by makeup to building material shortages across an entire country, the making of this epic was stranger than any ancient Egyptian legend. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Cleopatra. Fact 1. The Vatican threatened Elizabeth Taylor's life. When Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton began their passionate affair on the set of Cleopatra in 1962, they sparked one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood history. What most people don't realize is that their romance didn't just create tabloid headlines, it actually put Taylor's life in serious danger and required armed protection from the Italian government. The Vatican was absolutely outraged by the affair between the two married stars filming in Rome, which was practically in their backyard. The Vatican City newspaper published a scathing open letter that condemned Taylor for what they called erotic vagrancy, essentially calling her an immoral woman who was destroying the sanctity of marriage. The Catholic Church's official newspaper went even further, stating that Taylor was so despicable that her own children should be taken away from her. Taylor later recalled that reading these attacks from one of the world's most powerful religious institutions literally made her vomit. But the Vatican's public shaming was just the beginning of Taylor's troubles. The intense controversy surrounding her affair with Burton attracted dangerous attention from religious extremists and moral crusaders who wanted to take matters into their own hands. Taylor remembered that during filming, someone was actually at the studio trying to blow her up with a bomb. This wasn't just an empty threat or a publicity stunt, it was a real assassination attempt that forced the Italian authorities to take immediate action. For 5 straight days during the production, the Italian FBI had to provide round-the-clock protection for Taylor on the Cleopatra set. Armed agents surrounded the filming locations, and security barriers were set up to prevent any potential attackers from getting close to the star. Taylor described this period as a horrendous week, where she couldn't focus on her performance because she was genuinely afraid for her life. The scandal had grown so intense that even making a movie had become a matter of life and death. Fact 2. Italy ran out of building materials. The production of Cleopatra was so massive that it literally caused a nationwide shortage of building materials across all of Italy. When 20th Century Fox moved their entire operation from London to Rome's Cinecittà studios in 1961, they had no idea that their epic movie would actually impact an entire country's construction industry. The scale of what they were trying to build was absolutely enormous. The production team needed to construct 79 different elaborate sets, including a recreation of ancient Alexandria, the Roman Forum, and Cleopatra's palace. Each of these sets was incredibly detailed and required massive amounts of lumber, stone, marble, and other raw materials. The Roman Forum set alone was built 3 times larger than the actual historical Forum in Rome, which gives you an idea of just how much material they needed. The demand from this single movie production was so intense that it began affecting construction projects throughout Italy. Lumber yards that normally supplied materials for homes, businesses, and other buildings suddenly found their entire inventory being bought up by the Cleopatra production team. The movie required such massive quantities of wood, metal, and stone that regular construction companies couldn't get the materials they needed for their own projects. What made this situation even worse was that specialist suppliers realized they could charge much higher prices because of the desperate demand from the Hollywood production. These suppliers started increasing their costs significantly, knowing that Fox was willing to pay almost any amount to keep their troubled production moving forward. This created a dangerous precedent where the cost of film supplies in Italy became permanently inflated. The ripple effects of this material shortage ended up hurting the Italian film industry for years to come. Italian movie producers found that the costs of making films at Cinecittà had become so expensive that they couldn't afford to maintain the same production values. This contributed to a decline in the quality and number of Italian-made epic films, particularly the popular sword and sandal movies that had been thriving in the country. Fact 3. Hammering carpenters. Ruined take after take. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz faced one of the most frustrating problems in film history when he moved the Cleopatra production to Rome's Cinecittà studios. The Italian film crews had no understanding of why they needed to be quiet during filming, which led to countless ruined takes and wasted hours of expensive production time. The root of this bizarre problem came from a fundamental difference in how Italian movies were made compared to American films in the early 1960s. In Italy, absolutely every single film was post-dubbed, which means that all the dialogue and sound effects were added in a recording studio after the filming was completed. Italian actors would perform their scenes on set, but their voices would be recorded separately later in a controlled environment, so it didn't matter how much noise was happening during the actual filming. This meant that Italian film crews had never learned the importance of maintaining complete silence while cameras were rolling. While Mankiewicz was trying to film dramatic scenes between Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, capturing their actual voices and performances in real time, the Italian carpenters working on other sets would continue their construction work without any consideration for the filming happening nearby. The constant sound of hammering, sawing, and general construction noise made it impossible for Mankiewicz to record usable dialogue for his scenes. Every time he would call action, and the actors would begin their performances, the rhythmic pounding of hammers would echo through the sound equipment, completely ruining the take. The production lost hours and hours of valuable filming time because Mankiewicz had to repeatedly stop scenes and try to explain to the Italian crew that silence was absolutely essential during filming. The language barrier made this problem even worse, as Mankiewicz and his American crew struggled to communicate the urgency of this issue to workers who had never encountered this requirement before. The Italian crews simply couldn't understand why they needed to stop their important construction work just because some actors were saying lines that could easily be recorded later in a studio. Fact 4. Taylor's $1 million salary started as a joke. Elizabeth Taylor became the first Hollywood star in history to earn $1 million for a single movie role, but this groundbreaking salary happened completely by accident when what she thought was a sarcastic joke was taken seriously by the studio executives at 20th Century Fox. In 1958, producer Walter Wanger was desperately trying to cast the lead role in his ambitious Cleopatra project. He had already approached several major stars, but none of them seemed right for the part of the legendary Egyptian queen. Taylor was his dream choice, but her asking price was expected to be far beyond what any studio had ever paid a single actor for one film. When Wanger finally decided to make his move, he called Taylor while she was on the set of her current movie, Suddenly Last Summer. Taylor wasn't available to take the call, so Wanger ended up speaking with her husband Eddie Fisher instead. Fisher listened to the producer's pitch about the Cleopatra role and then said he would discuss it with his wife and get back to him with an answer. When Fisher explained the offer to Taylor, she was in a playful mood and didn't think the studio would seriously consider paying her what she thought was an outrageous amount of money. Without giving it much serious thought, Taylor laughed and told her husband to call Wanger back with a response that she assumed would end the conversation immediately. She said, "Sure. Tell him I'll do it for $1 million." Fisher dutifully called Wanger back and delivered Taylor's message, expecting the producer to laugh or hang up the phone. Instead, Wanger paused for a moment and then shocked everyone by saying that the studio would accept her terms. In October of 1959, Taylor officially signed her contract and made Hollywood history as the first actor to receive a seven-figure salary for a single picture, all because of what started as a throwaway joke. Fact 5. Caesarion was recast due to growth spurts. The young actor playing Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, had to be completely replaced during filming because he literally grew too tall while the production dragged on for months, creating one of the most noticeable continuity errors in movie history that you can still spot today. Caesarion was supposed to be around 4 years old in the film, and the original American child actor cast in the role was the perfect size when filming began. However, the Cleopatra production was notorious for its endless delays, cost overruns, and scheduling problems that stretched what should have been a normal filming schedule into a multi-year nightmare. One of the most elaborate scenes in the entire movie was Cleopatra's grand entrance into Rome, where she arrives on a massive golden sphinx surrounded by thousands of extras in an incredible display of wealth and power. This spectacular Rome entrance sequence was particularly problematic because it required perfect lighting conditions to achieve the dramatic visual effect that director Joseph L. Mankiewicz wanted. The scene had to be postponed again and again for several months, while the crew waited for the right weather and lighting conditions to make Elizabeth Taylor look absolutely stunning as she made her triumphant arrival in the Eternal City. During these long delays, the young American boy playing Caesarion experienced a significant growth spurt, as children naturally do over the course of several months. By the time the crew was finally ready to film the Rome entrance scene, the original actor had grown so much taller that he no longer looked like the same 4-year-old character who had appeared in earlier scenes with Taylor and Rex Harrison. The production team had no choice but to find a replacement, and they ended up casting a local Italian boy who was the right height for the role. The problem was that this new actor spoke with a thick Italian accent, which was completely different from the American accent of the original child actor. If you watch the movie carefully, you can clearly hear Caesarian's voice change dramatically between scenes, making it obvious that 2 different children played the same character. Fact 6. Extras kept shouting, "Liz, Liz," instead of Cleopatra. One of the most expensive and elaborate scenes in Cleopatra nearly had to be completely reshot because the thousands of Italian extras hired for the sequence got so excited about seeing Elizabeth Taylor in person that they forgot they were supposed to be acting in a movie about ancient Egypt. The scene in question was Cleopatra's magnificent entrance into Rome, which was designed to be the visual centerpiece of the entire film. This sequence required an enormous production effort, with thousands of extras dressed as Roman citizens lining the streets to welcome the Egyptian queen. The extras were supposed to cheer and shout, "Cleopatra! Cleopatra!" as Taylor rode through the recreated Roman Forum on her golden sphinx, creating the impression of a massive crowd celebrating her arrival in the Eternal City. However, by the time this scene was being filmed in 1962, Elizabeth Taylor had become one of the most famous people in the world. Her highly publicized affair with Richard Burton had made her the subject of constant media attention, and her face was on the cover of every magazine and newspaper across Europe. The Italian extras who had been hired for the scene were completely starstruck when they saw the legendary Hollywood actress up close in her stunning golden costume. When the cameras started rolling and Taylor made her grand entrance on the elaborate Sphinx prop, the excitement among the crowd of extras became impossible to control. Instead of staying in character as ancient Roman citizens welcoming an Egyptian queen, they began shouting, "Liz, Liz!" at the top of their lungs, completely breaking the illusion that this was supposed to be a scene set in ancient times. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz watched in horror as months of preparation and thousands of dollars worth of costumes, sets, and coordination were nearly ruined by enthusiastic fans who couldn't separate the real-life celebrity from the character she was playing. The scene came dangerously close to being completely unusable, which would have meant starting the entire elaborate sequence over again from the beginning. Fact 7. A gelato seller was caught on camera. The elaborate Rome entrance scene had to be completely reshot when eagle-eyed editors discovered that one enterprising extra had turned the sweltering film set into his own personal ice cream business, completely destroying the ancient Roman atmosphere that the production team had spent months creating. Filming Cleopatra's grand entrance into Rome was an incredibly demanding process that took place during the hottest part of the Italian summer. Thousands of extras were dressed in heavy Roman costumes and had to stand for hours in the blazing sun while the crew worked to capture the perfect shots of Elizabeth Taylor's triumphant arrival. The heat was so intense that many of the extras were struggling to stay comfortable in their elaborate period clothing, which included heavy robes, armor, and headpieces that weren't designed for modern comfort. The scene required multiple takes and camera angles to achieve the epic scope that director Joseph L. Mankiewicz envisioned, which meant that the extras had to maintain their positions and stay in character for much longer than anyone had originally planned. As the hours dragged on under the scorching Roman sun, the crowd of costumed performers became increasingly uncomfortable and desperate for any kind of relief from the heat. One particularly clever extra decided to take advantage of the situation by bringing a small cart of gelato onto the set and quietly selling the frozen treats to his fellow performers between takes. He thought he was being discreet enough to avoid detection by the cameras and crew members, but he underestimated how carefully every inch of the massive set would be examined during the editing process. When the film editors began reviewing the footage weeks later, they spotted the gelato vendor clearly visible in several shots, completely breaking the illusion that this was supposed to be ancient Rome. There he was, dressed in Roman robes, but obviously selling modern Italian ice cream to other costumed extras who were eagerly lining up to buy his cold treats. The anachronistic sight of ancient Romans enjoying gelato made the expensive footage completely unusable, forcing the production to organize and film the entire sequence all over again. Fact 8. Taylor's tracheotomy scar had to be hidden. Elizabeth Taylor's makeup team faced an unusual challenge during the filming of Cleopatra because they had to carefully conceal a very visible scar on her neck that would have been a glaring historical error if it appeared in a movie. Set in ancient Egypt, the scar came from a life-saving emergency surgery that Taylor had undergone in March of 1961, just before the Cleopatra production moved from London to Rome. Taylor had developed a severe case of pneumonia that quickly progressed into a life-threatening condition, and doctors had to perform an emergency tracheotomy to help her breathe. This surgical procedure involved making an incision in her throat to insert a breathing tube directly into her windpipe, which left a permanent and quite noticeable scar across her neck. When Taylor recovered and was ready to resume filming, the makeup department realized they had a serious problem on their hands. Ancient Egyptians obviously didn't have modern surgical procedures, so there was no way that the real Cleopatra could have had a tracheotomy scar on her neck. The mark was too prominent to ignore, and it would have been immediately obvious to audiences that something was historically wrong if they could see a modern surgical scar on the Egyptian queen. The makeup artists had to develop special techniques and use careful camera angles to hide the scar throughout the entire production. They used heavy makeup, strategic lighting, and costume design to ensure that Taylor's neck area was either covered or shadows fell in just the right way to conceal the mark. This required extra time and attention during every single scene, making an already complicated production even more challenging. Interestingly, Taylor herself had a completely different attitude about her scar than the worried studio executives and makeup team. She was actually quite proud of the mark, because it represented her survival of a near-death experience, and she affectionately referred to it as her war wound. In her personal life, Taylor made very little effort to hide the scar and would often appear in public without trying to cover it, which sometimes annoyed the studio's publicity department, who preferred that she keep it concealed. Fact 9. Drowsy doves refuse to fly. One of the most elaborate visual effects in Cleopatra involved a miniature pyramid that was designed to dramatically open and release a flock of white doves, but the Roman heat made the birds so sleepy and comfortable that they absolutely refused to participate in the spectacle, creating a messy problem for the production crew. The pyramid prop was part of Cleopatra's grand entrance into Rome, where it was supposed to add an extra touch of Egyptian mystique and grandeur to her already impressive procession. The special effects team had carefully designed the miniature pyramid to split open at just the right moment, revealing the beautiful white doves inside, who would then fly out in a graceful display that would symbolize Cleopatra's divine power and connection to the gods. However, the blazing Italian summer heat had an unexpected effect on the birds that nobody had anticipated during the planning stages. The inside of the pyramid prop became incredibly warm as it sat in the direct sunlight for hours while the crew prepared for filming, and the doves found this environment to be perfectly comfortable for taking a long nap. The heat made them drowsy and lethargic, and they had no interest whatsoever in flying out when the pyramid opened as planned. When the cameras rolled and the pyramid split apart on cue, the crew expected to see a magnificent burst of white doves soaring into the blue Roman sky. Instead, they saw a collection of sleepy birds sitting contentedly inside the prop, completely ignoring their cue to create movie magic. The doves simply refused to move, no matter how long the cameras kept rolling or how many times the crew tried to encourage them to fly. The production team had to come up with a creative solution to this unexpected problem, and they assigned one unlucky crew member to hide inside the pyramid prop with the doves. His job was to physically shoo the birds out at the right moment by waving his arms and making noise to startle them into flight. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an extremely unpleasant assignment because the nervous doves responded to the stress by defecating liberally all over the inside of the pyramid, and the poor crew member who was trying to help them perform their scene. Fact 10. Egypt initially banned Elizabeth Taylor. The Egyptian government initially refused to allow Elizabeth Taylor to enter their country to film scenes for Cleopatra because she had converted to Judaism when she married her fourth husband, Eddie Fisher, but they quickly changed their position when they realized how much money the Hollywood production would bring to their economy. This diplomatic incident created a serious problem for 20th Century Fox because they had originally planned to film several important scenes in Egypt to give the movie authentic locations that would match the historical setting of Cleopatra's story. Egypt was the obvious choice for filming a movie about the famous Egyptian queen, and the production team had already invested significant time and money into planning shoots at various historical sites throughout the country. Taylor had converted to Judaism in 1959 when she married singer Eddie Fisher, who was Jewish. At the time, Egypt had strict policies against allowing Jewish visitors into the country due to ongoing political tensions in the Middle East and the recent conflicts between Egypt and Israel. The Egyptian authorities viewed Taylor's religious conversion as grounds for denying her entry, regardless of her fame or the importance of the film project. When the Egyptian government announced their decision to bar Taylor from the country, it created a major crisis for the Cleopatra production. The studio had already spent enormous amounts of money on pre-production planning and location scouting in Egypt, and they were facing the possibility of having to completely redesign their filming strategy and find alternative locations that could stand in for ancient Alexandria and other Egyptian settings. However, the Egyptian government soon realized that their decision was going to cost them a significant economic opportunity. The Cleopatra production represented millions of American dollars that would be spent on local crew members, equipment rentals, hotel accommodations, catering, transportation, and various other services that would benefit the Egyptian economy. After calculating the potential financial impact of losing this major Hollywood production, the government officials quickly reversed their decision and announced that Taylor would be welcome to film in Egypt after all. The economic benefits of hosting one of the most expensive movies ever made proved to be more important than their initial political concerns. Fact 11. Fox had the world's third biggest navy. The naval battle scenes in Cleopatra required so many ships and boats that 20th Century Fox temporarily assembled what was jokingly referred to as the world's third largest navy, highlighting just how massive and ambitious this Hollywood production had become. The movie included several spectacular naval sequences that were crucial to telling Cleopatra's story, particularly the famous Battle of Actium, where Cleopatra and Mark Antony's combined fleets faced off against Octavian's Roman navy in a decisive confrontation that would determine the fate of the ancient world. To recreate these epic sea battles with the kind of scale and authenticity that director Joseph L. Mankiewicz envisioned, the production team needed an enormous number of vessels of all different sizes and types. The studio had to acquire, rent, or build dozens of ships that could serve as ancient Roman and Egyptian warships, ranging from massive galleys that could hold hundreds of extras dressed as soldiers and sailors, to smaller boats that would be used for close-up shots and detailed action sequences. Many of these vessels had to be specially modified or completely reconstructed to look like authentic ancient ships, which required extensive work by skilled craftsmen and boat builders. In addition to the large warships, the production also needed numerous support vessels to carry camera equipment, lighting gear, and crew members during the filming of the water-based scenes. The logistics of coordinating all these boats, ensuring they were in the right positions at the right times, and managing the safety of hundreds of cast and crew members working on the water was an incredibly complex operation that required military-level planning and coordination. The sheer number of vessels that Fox had assembled for the production was so impressive that industry observers began joking that the studio had created the third largest navy in the world, ranking behind only the United States and British naval forces. While this was obviously an exaggeration meant for humorous effect, it captured the incredible scale of resources that the studio was willing to commit to making Cleopatra the most spectacular epic film ever produced. Fact 12. The director was fired but had to be rehired. Joseph L. Mankiewicz was fired from the Cleopatra production during the editing phase, but 20th Century Fox quickly discovered that they had made a terrible mistake because only Mankiewicz understood how all the pieces of the massive film were supposed to fit together. The studio executives fired Mankiewicz during post-production because they were frustrated with the enormous cost overruns and endless delays that had plagued the project from the very beginning. The production had spiraled completely out of control, going from an original budget of $2 million to over $40 million, and studio head Daryl F. Zanuck wanted someone to blame for the financial disaster that was threatening to bankrupt the entire company. However, the executives soon realized that they had created an even bigger problem by dismissing the director. Mankiewicz had been working under extremely unusual circumstances throughout the entire production, essentially writing the script as he filmed each scene rather than following a traditional pre-written screenplay. This unconventional approach meant that there was no complete shooting script that other editors or directors could use to understand how the story was supposed to progress from one scene to the next. When the new editing team tried to piece together the hours and hours of footage that had been shot over the course of nearly 3 years, they quickly discovered that the massive amount of film material made no sense without Mankiewicz's guidance. Only he knew which scenes were meant to connect to each other, what the character motivations were supposed to be in each sequence, and how the complex political and romantic storylines were intended to weave together into a coherent narrative. The studio executives found themselves in the embarrassing position of having to swallow their pride and ask Mankiewicz to return to the project that they had just fired him from. They literally had no choice but to bring him back, because without his knowledge of how the story was supposed to work, they would have been left with millions of dollars worth of beautiful but completely unusable footage that could never be turned into an actual movie. Fact 13. Chili was air, freighted from Hollywood. Studio executive Spiros Skouras went to extraordinary lengths to keep Elizabeth Taylor happy during the troubled Cleopatra production by having her favorite chili specially prepared at a famous Hollywood restaurant and then flown thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean to reach her in Europe. The chili came from Chasen's, which was one of the most exclusive and popular restaurants in Hollywood during the 1960s. Located on Beverly Boulevard in West Hollywood, Chasen's was famous for serving the biggest stars in the entertainment industry, and it had developed a legendary reputation for its special chili recipe that celebrities absolutely loved. The restaurant's chili was so popular among Hollywood's elite that many stars would specifically request it whenever they were dining there. Taylor had become completely obsessed with Chasen's chili and considered it to be her absolute favorite comfort food, especially when she was feeling stressed or homesick during long filming periods away from California. The Cleopatra production was particularly difficult and emotionally draining for Taylor, not just because of the demanding physical requirements of the role, but also because of the intense media scrutiny surrounding her affair with Richard Burton and the constant pressure from studio executives who were worried about the spiraling costs of the film. Skouras realized that keeping his biggest star happy and motivated was crucial to the success of the production, especially considering that Taylor was being paid an unprecedented $1 million for her performance, and the entire movie depended on her being able to deliver a convincing portrayal of the Egyptian queen. When Taylor mentioned how much she missed the chili from Chasen's, Skouras decided that this was a small price to pay to maintain her morale and keep her focused on her work. The studio executive arranged for the restaurant to prepare fresh batches of their famous chili and then had the food specially packaged and loaded onto airplanes for the long journey from Los Angeles to Rome. This expensive and logistically complicated operation was repeated multiple times throughout the lengthy production, demonstrating just how far the studio was willing to go to accommodate their temperamental but invaluable star. Fact 14. Female extras went on strike. The female extras who were hired to play Cleopatra's servants and attendants organized a formal strike during filming at Cinecittà Studios because they were being constantly harassed by the Italian male extras and crew members, forcing the production to address serious workplace safety concerns. The costume design for Cleopatra called for many of the female extras to wear very revealing outfits that were supposed to represent the exotic and sensual atmosphere of ancient Egypt. These costumes included thin, flowing fabrics, low necklines, and exposed midriffs that were designed to create the lavish and seductive visual style that director Joseph L. Mankiewicz wanted for the palace scenes and various ceremonial sequences throughout the film. However, the combination of these revealing costumes and the predominantly male Italian film crew created an uncomfortable and inappropriate working environment for the women who were trying to do their jobs as professional extras. The Italian men working on the production began treating the female performers as objects of entertainment rather than as serious participants in the filmmaking process, making unwanted advances and inappropriate comments that made it difficult for the women to focus on their work. The situation became so problematic that the female extras felt they had no choice but to take collective action to protect themselves and demand better treatment from the production company. They organized themselves into a group and announced that they would refuse to continue working until the studio implemented proper protections and established clear rules about appropriate behavior on the set. The strike created a serious problem for the production because these female extras were essential for many of the elaborate palace scenes and crowd sequences that were central to the visual spectacle of the film. The production team was forced to negotiate with the striking women and agree to their demands for better security and supervision to ensure that they could work in a safe and respectful environment. This incident highlighted the challenges that international film productions faced when working with crews from different cultural backgrounds, and it demonstrated that even in the glamorous world of Hollywood filmmaking, basic workplace safety and respect were ongoing issues that needed to be actively addressed by studio management. Fact 15. The film had 3 directors and 2 complete productions. Cleopatra is essentially 2 completely different movies that were made with different directors, different leading men, and different scripts. making it one of the most expensive do-overs in Hollywood history when 20th Century Fox had to scrap their entire first production and start from scratch. The original version of Cleopatra began filming in 1960 at Pinewood Studios in London under the direction of Rouben Mamoulian, who was a respected filmmaker known for his work on musicals and dramatic films. The studio had cast Peter Finch to play Julius Caesar and Stephen Boyd to play Mark Antony alongside Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra, and the production team had already built elaborate sets and begun filming several scenes when disaster struck. Elizabeth Taylor developed a severe case of pneumonia during the London filming that quickly became life-threatening, forcing the production to shut down completely while she recovered from her illness. The combination of Taylor's health crisis, terrible weather conditions in England, and mounting production costs convinced the studio executives that they needed to make dramatic changes to save the project from complete failure. When Taylor recovered and was ready to return to work, Fox made the decision to abandon everything they had already filmed and completely restart the production with a new director, a new script, and a mostly new cast. They brought in Joseph L. Mankiewicz to replace Mamoulian as director, and they moved the entire production from London to Rome's Cinecittà Studios to take advantage of better weather and more authentic Mediterranean locations. Most significantly, they replaced both of the original male leads with completely different actors who brought entirely different interpretations to their characters. Rex Harrison was cast as the new Julius Caesar, replacing Peter Finch, while Richard Burton took over the role of Mark Antony from Stephen Boyd. This meant that months of work and millions of dollars worth of footage, sets, costumes, and preparation were simply thrown away as if the first production had never happened. The final film that audiences saw in 1963 was actually the second complete version of Cleopatra, created by an entirely different creative team with a fundamentally different vision of how the story should be told.